Stop. Yes, stop going everywhere for all your information about strength training for running. This is all you need right here. Because strength training, like most things in life, is super confusing and nuanced. Information is everywhere with so many options and variations depending on each person. It's no wonder why all of us runners tend to get overwhelmed, myself included. In this episode, we, which is me and a medical sports professional, will create a robust toolkit so that you can learn almost everything about strength training, specifically for running, so that you can feel more empowered to make better decisions about your training habits, so you can insert whatever you want to get from running. Run far, run long, run fast, run your best time, do XYZ. In this episode, we'll touch on definitions of things you hear around strength training that might be confusing, you just don't know.
We then have the tendon, which attaches the muscle to the bone to help move a joint.
Tendinopathy versus tendinitis.
What happens in tendinopathy is they start to break down and they start not forming as well and neatly and as nicely as we'd like them to every time you're going through your running and training.
Why is strength training now the new bee's knees when 50 years ago, not too many runners were doing this that we know of?
I think the research has changed and there's been more and more coming out on how it can benefit runners.
Why do you think some, if not most runners, tend to avoid strength training?
Time, I always find, is the biggest factor. That's what they struggle with. They want to get their Ks in. They want to be, obviously, managing work, kids, life, and then strength training is just I need to get that done too.
And a bunch more. Enough from me. Let's go. So before we ever jump into anything, I always like to define it. Definition 1. Tendons versus muscles versus bone strength in a simplified way for people that are not physiotherapists and scientists.
So we have the big bulky muscles. We then have the tendon, which attaches the muscle to the bone to help move a joint. A joint is when two or more bones meet, again, to create movement and stability.
Tendinopathy versus tendinitis. There's another one, tendinosis.
Yes,
yeah. So I see these terms pop up a lot. What's the difference between the three?
Tendinitis is a bit of an old school term because the itis infers that the tendon is inflamed. What we know now, it is a non-inflammatory condition. It's rather, and I hate this word, a degenerative condition. So that basically,
which is what I have.
Yeah, it basically means the tendon isn't as strong as we'd like it to be. They're made up of tightly bound collagen fibers, and what happens in tendinopathy is they start to break down and they start not forming as well and neatly and as nicely as we'd like them to every time you're going through your running and training. Let's ignore tendinitis because it basically doesn't exist.
Okay, so it's just an old school term.
Yeah.
And for some reason, American physiotherapist, physical therapist, and general practitioners still use that term.
And I think it's really important to differentiate too because, something that's degenerative versus something that's inflammatory needs to be managed differently. Inflammation requires rest, potentially medications. Well, we do know you don't want to completely rest tendons. You want to get them stronger. So people might be apprehensive doing certain tasks on their, tendinopathy, thinking that it's inflamed, where it's not the case.
That's crucial. Okay. So I hear these terms a lot in the physical therapy world, the strength training world, and it's eccentric, concentric, and isometric.
So an isometric exercise is when you're holding a muscle contraction, but you're not moving the joint through range of motion.
Kind of like ice. Ice is how I like ice.
Oh, yeah, it's frozen.
It's frozen. That's how I remember it, yeah.
So an example is a wall squat. You're just sitting there, nothing's moving, but your quads are contracting. Now, concentric is the muscle shortening phase, and that's such as when you're standing up from a squat.
So you're pushing through,
pushing
like the hard part.
Yeah, well, arguably, because I think eccentric control is harder. But eccentric is when the muscle is lengthening. So that's the difference. We have the static contraction, isometric, the shortening contraction, which is the concentric, and the muscle lengthening phase, which is the eccentric.
And that would be the going down of the squat.
Yes, yeah.
All right, and the last definition, it's a messy one, and feel free to correct me on this. So I hear the term hypertrophy or hypertrophy as it's spelled, HYPER trophy. And then there's muscle endurance. So these are different types of strength training. Hypertrophy, muscle endurance, general strength training, and then power.
Oh yeah, hypertrophy is when you're getting an increase in the muscle size, but also strength as well. Typical set and rep range is 3 to 4 sets of 12.
Okay.
And an example when you do it is, I usually start most training programs in that rep range, whether it be, tendon rehab or getting someone onto a running program, because if we're going too heavy too early, that's going to put a person in risk of injury. You need to build into, going into the lower rep ranges. Because runners do worry about putting on too much muscle mass, but runners run a lot, and that's catabolic to muscle size. So if you're lifting in that, 3 to 12 rep range and you're running lots, you're not going to see a huge change in muscle size. So that's important to consider because you still are going to get good benefits in strength.
Well, while we're here at catabolic, so running is catabolic, which breaks down the muscle.
Yes.
And then strength training is an anabolic activity, which
particularly
builds
hypertrophy. Yeah.
So next we got muscle endurance.
I hate the term muscle endurance, and I basically never prescribe it. It's when you're doing, less sets, maybe 2 sets, and you're doing higher rep range. So anything above 12 starts to creep into that muscle endurance. Muscle endurance isn't effective for endurance performance because it's not. Well, it's basically doing something almost similar than what we do, and we don't want that. We actually want to provide a heavier stimulus to get better adaptation in the muscle's capacity to produce strength. So I actually can't find one reason where I've included muscle endurance sets and reps with any of my exercise prescription.
The last thing is power, and lifting heavy is what a lot of runners say.
Power is that ballistic force in your body to produce that ballistic force. I think it is important with runners too, particularly if you have been strengthening for a while and we want to, get more explosive capacity. It facilitates that, rapid elastic recoil of the tendons. You can do it a couple of ways. You can do the power training in the gym. Set and rep range looks something like perhaps 4 sets of 6. Exercises look like, again, they're a bit more advanced exercises, but power cleans. But you can also get power development through your plyometric training too, and that's all your jumping-based activities.
Yeah.
Right now is the part where I go, hey, if you're not feeling this, make sure you subscribe, rate, share it out with your friends about how amazing this is, rah, 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 rah. All right. While you should go out and do that anyway, how about I actually give you something that will help you? Is the running, health and fitness, and endurance sport internet too much sometimes? Is it too much conflicting content on how to train right? Or you just don't have time to read and watch the latest trends on how to, carb cycle for your next marathon? Don't worry. I'll take care of that for you by showing you how to train, race, and live 1% better consistently. To do this, just sign up for my free newsletter, OPB. I figure out this whole 1% better thing so you don't have to by scouring the endurance sports deepest and darkest corners of the internet. Go to dlatecreates.com/news, all spelled the normal way, to be inspired and motivated on the regular. Let's get back into it.
So why do runners need strength training? This is, I'd say, the thesis of all the stuff we've done over the last few days of recording. Look, 50 years ago, runners didn't do this, quote unquote. That's actually a lie. But a lot of people like to say that anecdotally. They're, I didn't hear about runners doing plyometrics and lifting weights and they were fine. So what do you think has changed?
I think the research has changed and there's been more and more coming out on how it can benefit runners. I was actually having a look at when it first started appearing in the literature, and I really couldn't find too much beyond the 2000s. So really, I think beyond 2010, there's been so much more coming out and showing how beneficial it is to the sport. So I think it's still, I wouldn't say it's in its infancy, but there's not a huge amount of research from, the 1990s and later, earlier, I should say.
Always the research, always the data. Why do you think some, if not most runners, avoid strength training, not strength training, or I guess avoid strength training? What do you think it is, and how can they combat that? Like, what's a good tool that they can use, like behavioral?
Yeah, time I always find is the biggest factor. That's what they struggle with. They want to get their Ks in. They want to be, obviously, managing work, kids, life, and then strength training is just I need to get that done too. Some people are not as confident in a gym-based setting, so that may be a limiting factor. That's the two things I think about is not feeling confident, not knowing what to do, and not having the time being the biggest factor. How they can combat that, well, I mean, that's what I made an app for. is a nice little segue. But with making the app I just wanted to make something accessible to everyone. I wanted to make it quick and easy to do, like not easy as in effortless for the exercise, but something that doesn't take up too much time. I've got two facets with the app. One that's, home exercises, 4 exercises to do no longer than 20 minutes out of your day, or for those runners who do want to step in the gym, I've got some gym-based programs too.
Awesome. I will be promoting this and plugging this. Go check out the app, 10W2S. You literally just type it in. Most countries, it's available in the App
worldwide.
Store.
Yep.
Whatever App Store, Google Play, and
both.
Android and Apple. In strength training, should you go to failure or almost failure?
I would say almost failure.
Almost.
So you're around that 85% repetition max. Yeah.
So you have one or two left in you?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. All right, squats. The question of all questions. Ass to grass squat, so all the way down. Half squat, quarter squats.
Half squats for sure.
Half squats for sure. Okay. Is there a time to do all 3?
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
Okay.
variety is good, but in I guess reference to in context of running, half squats more similarly replicate the running stride in itself, and that's also where the research sits.
Here's a fun one. When's the best time to do strength training for running? Very contentious topic.
I know.
Before or after the run? And then timing. Should it be 4 hours if you do it after, 4 hours after, immediately after, 12 hours?
Yeah, I think the best strength is the one that gets done, don't get me wrong.
Yes.
You want to do the one that is your priority first. So if you're thinking like you've got a tendon injury and we really want to start be lifting heavy here, I'd go strength first and then do your run afterwards. If the run's the priority, run first and then strength afterwards. In terms of timing, obviously opposite ends of the day is better, but once again, no issue doing them at the same time. You just want to get it in. The thing to consider too is I often read that, you shouldn't, heavy strength train when you've got a high intensity running session, where I think it actually might be the contrary. You want to have your heavier days where your day off is where your body has that chance to recover and adapt. So if you're going heavy run day A, then heavy strength day B, you're providing a lot of training stimulus on each of those days. Rather, if you do the strength and the harder sessions on the same day, perhaps it gives a bit more recovery in the next following day. You don't have to do that, and don't take it with a grain of salt, but that's something to consider too.
Here's a kind of theoretical, hypothetical as we wrap this up. Is doing something with average form and not the optimal reps better than nothing?
Yeah, I sometimes I think form doesn't need to be as precise as we think it should be.
To get the benefits.
Yes,
right?
to get the benefits. Any injury is when your body is not used to that stimulus. So if you have poor form when you pick up something and it was relatively heavy and that's an injury, my back's sore, then clearly your body's unprepared for it. But if you're in a starting place, yes, form is important, but it is, if it's not to a degree, I don't think it's a huge thing to worry about unless you're, again, lifting very heavy and you're not prepared for that lift.
So something I hear, I coach a few runners, and one of the runners that I coach, he was like, dude, I feel really sore after I run or after I lift, and it feels like it's hurting my running. And I've actually heard this from other people. They're like, strength training, lifting makes me slow. How do runners manage that? Is there I feel like there's a few week period of adaptation.
Correct. Yeah.
That they need to just get through it.
Absolutely.
Do they regress it? Tell me, give me a quick.
So DOMS, which is the delayed onset of muscle soreness, it is much more likely to occur when you're first starting a new program. So an example for me is when I've neglected gym for a little bit, then I go in, get some heavy leg work in and I go for a run the next day, my legs feel like bricks. It's just uncomfortable. It sucks. You feel slow as ever. So there's going to be a few, if you haven't previously done that kind of strength, it's going to be a few week period, adaptation period, that you're going to feel a little bit slow and heavy during some of your training runs.
But a random theory that I heard from a physio, and he said that there's some new studies, and it's really hard because it's based on how a person feels, and those are really tough studies. But basically, the correlation between how bad a tendon feels, the pain of a tendon, and actually what's happening in the tendon
Yes, yeah.
are like total opposites, meaning that if a tendon feels a 9 out of 10, the actual damage to it or I wouldn't even say inflammation, but like what's actually happening is actually way less. And possibly vice versa.
So for most people, I put everything on a scale of 10. I say between 1 to 2 is safe, 3 to 4 is acceptable, and really like keep it under 5. Anything higher than that, and that's both during the run and in the 24 hours afterwards. So if you go for a run, a little bit, a bit sensitive, but the next day, you're like hobbling around, so much pain, it was clearly too much. So that's the best way I try and manage tendon injuries and making sure runners can, maintain their training load is you keep it on that scale. And it's very subjective, but you don't want to be in a position where you feel like you're changing the way you run. That's certainly too much. But in terms of pain sensitivity, when runners are coming through and we do want to work on tendon strength and we're on perhaps first session, we're doing our calf raises for an Achilles tendinopathy, I almost want them to feel a bit of sensitivity through the tendon. It's clearly sore, and if you're doing your calf raises and you're not feeling anything, then you may not be providing a sufficient stimulus for it. Maybe pick up, a weight in your hand, try again, and perhaps you feel a 1 or 2 out of 10 pain. I almost think that's a pretty good load.
Just as a core takeaway of it all.
So strength training, if you are a distance runner, is one of the most important things you can do for your training to minimize injury risk. It builds the capacity of your muscles, your tendons, and your bones to tolerate all the weekly kilometers, miles you're putting through it. And it can also improve performance. So make sure you fit it in. And also strength loss is primarily due to disuse, not aging. So you have to keep it up. It's often, I find actually with the older runners, or older people I should say, they often stop strength training because they get one niggle in their knee and they think, okay, it's not safe for me to be doing this stuff. I'm going to stop because my knee hurts. And that's where things deteriorate. So it is so important as a lifelong activity to continue your strength training as we get older.